Hello, thank you for joining us today and reviewing this PowerPoint about living with loss, coping with grief as a college student. Today we're going to be reviewing information on grief and loss as well as the extra challenges it poses for college students. My name is Amanda Bordfeld.
And I'm Devin Dautrick.
We're practicum students here at Drexel University's Counseling Center.
All right, so let's start off by just talking about what is grief. Unfortunately, loss is an inevitable part of everyone's life, and grief is really just the natural part of the healing process that comes as a result of a loss. However, this process can often be deeply painful, and usually the more significant your loss, the more intense the grief you'll be experiencing. Everyone experiences loss and grief at some point in time in their life, and people's experiences with grief and the way they express their grief really differs uniquely. No two losses are the same between people. Even for the same person at different times, it can really change. And how you define and experience grief is often impacted by things like your cultural traditions, your history of dealing with previous losses in your life, maybe any history or experience of trauma, and also your current stress and your belief systems. Okay, there's multiple types of losses that people can experience. Loss is really just the disappearance of something that's cherished, such as a person, a possession, maybe a position you have, or property. Again, there's many different types of loss that can be experienced as part of the process of living. And on the screen, you just see really just a few examples of the types of loss that exist. And additionally, the more significant the loss, usually the more intense the grief. However, even subtle losses can lead to grief. So for example, you might experience grief after moving away from home, maybe graduating from college, changing jobs, selling your family home, or even retiring from a career that you've loved. So next we're going to talk about some symptoms of grief and the normal reactions to the grieving process. While loss affects people in different ways, many people experience some of the following symptoms when they're grieving. Just remember that almost anything you experience in the early stages of grief is normal, even including the feeling like you might be going crazy, feeling like you're in a bad dream, or questioning your religious beliefs. So just to touch on a few of the symptoms that are listed here on this slide, a very common symptom right after a loss is a feeling of shock and disbelief. It can often be really hard to accept what's happened. You might feel numb, have trouble believing that the loss really happened, or even deny the truth. If someone you love has died, you may keep expecting them to show up, even though you know they're gone. And also sadness is probably one of the most common reactions to grief. It's probably the most universally experienced symptom of grief. You might have feelings of emptiness, despair, yearning, or deep loneliness, and you might also cry a lot or feel emotionally unstable. And finally, I just wanted to talk briefly about a very common reaction, which is the feeling of guilt. So you might regret or feel guilty about things that you did or didn't say or do before someone passed away. You might also feel guilty about certain feelings. For example, feeling relieved when the person died after a long, difficult illness. And after a death, you may even feel guilty for not doing something to prevent the death, even if there was nothing really more that you could have done. Okay, next we'll talk about some stages of grief. In 1969, a psychiatrist by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross introduced what she called the 5 stages of grief. And these stages were based on her studies of the feelings of patients facing terminal illness, but many people have now generalized them to other types of negative life changes and losses, such as the death of a loved one or a breakup. So the first stage that she noted is denial, feeling that I feel fine, this can't really be happening to me. Next is anger, feelings of why me, it's not fair. There's also bargaining, thoughts that you'll do anything for a few more years with that person, or that you would give your life savings to have that person back. Also depression, so severe sadness, and why bother with anything? And also the last stage is acceptance, really getting to a point in your life where you're at peace with what has happened and feeling that it's really going to be okay. So if you're experiencing any of these emotions following a loss, it may help to know that your reaction is natural and that you'll heal in time. However, not everyone who's grieving goes through all of these stages, and that's perfectly okay. Contrary to popular belief, you don't have to go through each stage in order to heal. In fact, some people resolve their grief without going through any of these stages. And if you do go through these stages of grief, you also probably won't experience them in a neat sequential order, so don't worry about what you should be feeling or which stage you're supposed to be in. And something that's, I touched on briefly before, but is really important to keep in mind, is that grief is such an individual process. Each individual experiences and expresses grief differently. So for example, one person might withdraw and feel helpless, while another person might be very angry and want to take some action. And how you grieve really depends on many different factors. Your personality and how you cope with things, your life experience in the past, maybe any previous experiences with loss you may have had, your religion or your faith, and also the nature of the loss can really affect how you grieve. And importantly to know, the grieving process takes time. It really happens gradually, and it can't be forced or hurried. And again, there's really no normal timetable for grieving. So whatever your grief experience, it's important to be patient with yourself and just really allow that process to unfold naturally. Some people start to feel better in weeks or months, and for others, the grieving process can be measured in years.
And as we just heard from Devin, grief is obviously a very challenging time, so it's really critical when you're going through this process, whatever it looks like for you, that you take the time to devote time to yourself and really take care of yourself. And there are a couple suggestions of how to do this. And the first is to really consider and utilize your social support networks. During a time like this, like Devin mentioned, some people can really feel the need to isolate and withdraw, but what we know is that remaining connected can be a key to feeling better. So it can be an important time to reflect on who it is that you can turn to. Friends, family, support groups, someone within your religion, or even an individual counselor. The other thing I like to tell people too is consider who you can talk to, who you can share feelings with. And also know that there are other people who maybe you just want to spend time with and you'd rather not talk about the loss at this time, but just being close with someone else can be really helpful. So knowing your limits on what you're comfortable with and letting that significant other know about that can be really helpful. Next is really considering your physical well-being. So when you're going through an emotional period, it's really essential to keep your body physically prepared, and this will help reduce stress from other areas. So we know that regular sleeping, eating meals, and exercising are really essential. And it can be really hard during this time to do those things. You might not feel like eating, you might not feel like getting out and exercising, but we know that this is very helpful, and kind of pushing yourself to do that can help yourself during this time. Additionally, really avoiding substances such as drugs and alcohol. Sometimes you can turn to these and might make you temporarily feel better or numb those feelings, but ultimately this is kind of depleting your resources and adding to longer-term challenges. So taking the time to really avoid those things is important for yourself. Next is really considering daily activities and integrating some structure in. At this time, it might feel like things seem out of control or very unorganized. You're not sure where to start. So taking some time to plan out your day. What would you like to do? What are some things that you need to do? And also consider putting things in there that you enjoy doing or maybe once enjoyed. And this can certainly involve doing things with other people as well, which can kind of connect back to that first point of remaining connected with the people in your life. Finally, emotional allowance. So we know that suppressing emotions consistently is not the answer. So there might be times, maybe class or at work, where you need to kind of separate and not have those emotions come out as strongly, but ultimately we know that this is not a sufficient strategy all of the time, and that you really need to make some time for yourself to reflect and feel those things. One way to do that is to consider honoring your loss. So how can you bring that loss into your life and allow for that space and time to feel those things? And this can be really challenging as a college student. So how can you create this for yourself? At college or maybe at home, where can you find unique time and space to allow yourself to feel those emotions and to remember that person who meant so much to you? And there's a couple suggestions. So some people like to do that through creativity. So maybe it's journaling for yourself, or maybe writing to that person, through their artwork, potentially scrapbooking, so finding photos of that person, remembering times and great memories and putting those together. It can also be an outlet, and you can share this with other people in your life who might also be looking for something like that. Other people like to do it through action, so volunteering or participating in events that support a cause that meant something to you or to that loved one. Again, this is helping you to kind of get out and feel connected, and also honoring that person that you loved. And finally, talking about the person. This is different for everybody. When you're ready, who can that be with? Who can you reflect with? And who do you want to share a memory with, and how will you do that? Will it be telling a story? Will it be reflecting on photographs? So really kind of planning for that and creating that time and that space for it. Next, we want to talk about some of the unique challenges that college students face when dealing with a loss. So college students have multiple stressors and transitions going on in their life at this developmental stage that can really make going through a loss more complicated. To begin with, some could be geographically distant. So here you are at college, you're trying to establish your community here, and you might have left family and loved ones somewhere else. And then when you have a loss, you can feel very pulled in both directions. Should you be home? Should you be here? And where is it that you want to be? So you can see how this can really complicate and create more stress during this period. Finally, to consider the developmental factors. You're becoming a more autonomous person here at college, and you might feel that pull to also stay connected to your family. This can be challenging for anyone to do when they move to college, but when there's a loss, this can become even more complicated. Additionally, you have academic and career pressures. So you might be trying to manage classes or looking for a job, considering graduation. Can also complicate this period. And finally, the college social environment for some people doesn't really feel like it's a place where they can talk about their loss. They might feel that it's not appropriate. It's more social, I can't bring this up here. So really exploring who are those friends that you feel comfortable sharing that with is important for your process. Just kind of want to go through some of the statistics on grief and loss, because it's pretty surprising, and a lot of people might not realize how many people are managing a loss. So between 35 and 48% of college students have lost a family member or a close friend within the last 2 years. And 22 to 30% of college students have lost someone within the last year. This equates to in 2009, about 18.4 million students were enrolled in American colleges, so that's about 4.5 million college students who are grieving. And this information comes from an organization called Students of AMF, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, but they're really highlighting here so many college students might feel as though they're alone in this process, but then when you see these numbers, you realize that a lot of people are struggling with this, so it's really important to find those people if that's something that you would like, and share that with them so you're not alone. So something to consider about when to get help is that really, as Devin shared with us, grief really has absolutely no time frame. Everybody has a very unique process, and whenever you want to get help with this process, any time is the right time. So it could be right in the very beginning, it could be months or years later that you decide you want someone to support you in that. There are some other signs to consider too, if maybe this is impairing your life and you need to get someone to help you through it. So when considering if it's impairing, we want to really look at, has extended time gone by and you're not able to return to your daily activities? Maybe you're still not able to go to class, or you're missing work and this is becoming something that's bothering you. That could be a time where seeking out counseling or religious support could be important for you. Of course, also we want to consider, are feelings becoming more intense? Are they reflecting hopelessness or feeling like all you think about is death and maybe even your own death? Or you're really finding that you're turning to those substances to avoid those feelings because they're just too much to manage on your own. Of course, if you're noticing these things, this is another sign it might be time to get help. And finally, if you notice that you're really struggling and avoiding reminders of the loss, so not wanting to maybe go home, not go to places where you went with that loved one, this could also be a time to consider getting support. So we're going to talk about where to get help because there's a lot of different options for you. Individual therapy is, of course, one of those. So here at Drexel University Counseling Center, we offer free and confidential services to students. So this could be a place where you consider coming to get help in going through this. If you would rather not, you can always seek out a psychologist, a social worker in your area, and they can also provide that individual counseling to help you through that. Finally, some people will seek out a psychiatrist and consider medication during this period to help with those significant symptoms. Another thing to consider is group therapy or support groups. So it can be really helpful, especially like we mentioned, college students have a lot of unique challenges. So sitting with other people of similar ages might be really helpful for you during your time grieving. So we have previously offered a grief group here at Drexel University Counseling Center. So you can certainly call or email and see if that's something that is currently happening. And if it isn't, let them know that you're interested and we could potentially start something up. Also, you can search in your community. Look around for different support groups at other mental health agencies as well as colleges and religious organizations often offer support groups. And finally, this organization of National Students of AMF also has a great website where there's online support blogs. They also list resources in different areas, and you can actually search and see if there is a chapter near you. There's currently not a chapter at Drexel University, but there may be ones in the local area. So consider checking out that website. And finally, religious support. So utilizing both on and off campus religious leaders and groups if that's something that you find helpful in your grief process. And just a little bit more about AMF. This is their mission statement. You can certainly click on their website to learn more about it. But as you see, they have a We Get It supportive blog that can be really helpful for students. You can post your story, get feedback from other people, or just read along with others process, and that might be really helpful for you. Additionally, they host a national conference on college student grief, and they also run annual programs. And finally, this last website, Towson University's Counseling Center, has an excellent list of online resources as well as suggested books, and they're specifically tailored to different types of loss. And they also shared that there's quite a few online support groups, and they list those out there should that be something that you want to pursue. So finally, we just want to take some time to thank you for tuning into our presentation, and we hope that you found it helpful. If at any point in time you have any questions, you can of course call our counseling center, learn more about the services we offer here, as well as helping you to get connected to other services in the area. And finally, just remember that grief is a journey that doesn't have to be taken alone, and that there are people here to support you in your process. Thank you so much.
Thank you.